It's very likely humans will return to the moon very soon. The funding is there, and every aspect of the mission is either established or well into its development. It's a big, tricky task, but we already know humans are well up to the challenge. And this alone could make Elon Musk a trillionaire. But let me explain. I'm Brian. Welcome to My Tesla Weekend. But wait, you say, that's not his moon base, it's NASA's moon base, and they aren't paying anywhere close to $1 trillion for it. So what gives? Well, while grand in ambition, NASA's project is nothing like what SpaceX's base will be. Without all the red tape and bureaucracy of a government project, things can move very quickly. Just look at the speed and scale of Starlink deployment, or Starship development itself, to see how quickly things move when you don't have to get every last detail approved by the suits in DC. And while SpaceX will be instrumental to the Artemis mission, they will also build a prototype of the Mars base, but closer to home, on the moon. They can cheaply send up a dozen modules, and maybe a couple hundred bots just to put it all together. Let the bots dig out the site, bury the modules, cover it back up, ensure the hatches are all safe and accessible, and then head inside to get it configured. And that's not even the $1 trillion part. The money comes from what they do next. With construction complete, those bots are free to tackle new tasks. They can spend thousands of hours examining the surface as well as the subsurface every single month. They could head underground to incredible depths in search of really anything. They will provide insight to the moon humans have only dreamed of. But more than that, they can locate resources and even start gathering them. Sure, there'll be a NASA-funded moon mission, but SpaceX is going to build their own moon base, and it will be grand on a scale governments haven't envisioned in 60 years. The stuff of pure sci-fi fantasy. Yeah, many of the uber wealthy will pay whatever it costs to be on these missions. You can't put a price on what it means to have your name added to the very short list of people who have walked on the moon, except that soon you may be able to do exactly that. Once it's clear that moon bases are no longer the stuff of science fiction, every country with the means to get one of their own will jump at the chance. It's likely to only cost SpaceX $50 million a mission, so a 10-module space station could be delivered for $500 million, but sold to countries or companies for hundreds of billions. Remember, one-offs are extremely expensive, while things that are mass-produced quickly come down in price. Most of the cost of a satellite is the research and development. That's why bespoke satellites often cost hundreds of millions of dollars, while the Starlink assembly line is more than 100 times cheaper, and it's still falling in price as the volume continues to increase. A one-off moon module would be outrageously expensive. But if you build 10 of them, then you would see the cost fall significantly. And if you built 100 of them that you could link together, well, the cost will fall further still. If you have your own moon base or bases, plus you're building them for China, India, Japan, the European Space Agency, a few mining companies, and a few resort companies, well, pretty soon the cost per module will get down to a few $1 million. It could be cheaper than building a hotel in Tokyo, and also more profitable. So how could this alone make Elon a trillionaire? Well, I mean, he owns half of SpaceX, so whatever valuation they reach, about half of it is his. So let's go over the elements. 1, the value of private moon exploration is difficult to measure and would rely heavily on how successful it is, so we'll leave this at a conservative $4 billion a year. Surely they would be gathering data that's valuable to a whole host of companies, countries, universities, none of which who could afford an entire mission on their own, so they would just buy the data. And more valuable than the mineral and general exploration is the proof of concept that will make everything else follow from there. Number 2, unmanned research missions. There will be governments, universities, and companies around the world who can afford their own specific missions with their own parameters, who will hire SpaceX to conduct a variety of experiments and exploration on the moon that is mission specific. And they'll pay for that data collected, of course. Contracted missions could easily run in the $10 billion a year range. 3. Government-sponsored moon bases. Now, we touched on it briefly, but even if they only build at a lunar-wide rate of 3 modules per month and only charge $200 million each, that's still $7.2 billion a year. A 10-module base would only cost $2 billion, which is an incredible bargain when you consider boondoggles like the $1 billion launch tower contracted by NASA and the fact that every single launch by the space shuttle cost $450 million. And that was in 1990s money. Number 4, government-funded manned missions. Consider monthly missions with, say, 14 paid seats. Even $100 million a seat would be a bargain compared to the $90 million a seat United Launch Alliance charges to get just to the space station in low Earth orbit. The list of people willing and able to pay this would be long enough to last for years. Number 5, private-funded moon bases, and at a rate comparable to the government-funded ones, would add another $7.2 billion a year. There are many resorts on Earth that were built at prices exceeding $2 to $3 billion, to say nothing of the costs for industrial and research facilities. There's no reason companies and countries wouldn't buy these at prices like those. Number 6, if you're going to have private moon bases, you've got to have private-funded manned missions. Similar to the government-funded ones, these would likely run in the $100 million range initially per seat, but with only 10 paid seats instead of 14, since you got to have a crew. So imagine the prestige of being the first person to visit the moon a 3rd or 4th or 10th time, and all for just a fraction of your earthly wealth. There are mega billionaires who would gladly drop $1 billion for even 3 or 4 or 10 trips to the moon for sure. Number 7, gateway to Mars. If this works, and the physics says there's no reason it shouldn't, these moon bases will not only act as proof of concept for the Mars missions, but may further serve as the gateway to Mars. So who is going first? Will an American be the first to step foot on the red planet? Or will it be an explorer from China or India? What would you pay to make it happen once you realize it's not only a real possibility, but something looming on the immediate horizon? I put in $150 billion, which I think is low, and it may sound like a lot, and make no mistake it is, but that's less than the US defense budget increased from 2018 to now. Not the total defense budget, that's just how much it went up. That could easily be redirected to something more valuable to humanity, like getting humans to Mars. So if you take the revenue from these 7 factors and assign a 10x multiple on revenue, you reach a valuation for SpaceX in excess of $2 trillion, which would put Elon over the edge. Now, 10x is very high. A more normal valuation would be 3 times multiple on revenue. Well, that's only $300 billion for Elon, but this doesn't include any of the other launch and communication revenue SpaceX already has, and with a stellar trajectory, higher multiples can be expected. Yeah, space pun. And you can also ignore the revenue multiplier and focus instead on a profit multiplier to get there even easier. These will be incredibly high-margin missions and products. Unlike space missions of old, SpaceX doesn't dump every single rocket into the ocean. No, they reuse them, resulting in massive cost efficiencies. The cost to get to the moon has less to do with what it actually costs than what it's actually worth. These could easily have margins bigger than what they cost to do, meaning a 10x multiple on the real profit. Well, that would make these estimates low, if anything. So let's head off a big one early, the complaint that this is only for rich people. I mean, at first, a bit, yeah, but not even mostly. Early missions will almost exclusively be crewed by government-selected participants, just like most space missions have always been. Private missions will also be carried out by companies, but most of the early ones will be employees rather than tourists. And even later missions to Mun hotels will have staff there who are employed to be there, commoners who, when they return home, can go on the touring circuit as someone who went to the moon. While it would be great if 100% of these missions were crewed by great thinkers and artists and everyday people and scientists, the reality is that those participants will still get to go on as many missions as the budget allows. No, it's the rich people who aren't as concerned with the price who are bringing down the cost for everyone else, just like they do with smartphones, with oversized TVs, and the kinds of safety innovations we normally see in Formula One that ultimately make it to the cars we all ride around in. These tens and hundreds of billions aren't going into the pockets of other rich people, and they aren't being shipped into space. No, the cost of these missions will result in huge amounts of real dollars being spent right here on Earth. Everyone who builds these amazing rockets and components, everyone who mines for steel and nickel, everyone who makes the ceramic heat shields for re-entry, every one of them is going to be paid, and a lot of them will be paid by billionaires who otherwise were just hoarding their cash. So Elon's trillions won't be sitting in a bank account growing moss. No, it's the value of the company that will continue actively investing in getting us to Mars. And that's a lot of value to humanity right there. So what did I miss? What did I misunderstand? How do you hate my math? You gotta let me know. Tear me to shreds. I know you're gonna, so just get it done. Into them comments below. A big thanks to my patrons who get early access, bonus content, an ad-free experience in many cases, and help keep the lights on. Appreciate it so much. So stay tuned, stay juicy, and I can't wait to hear from you clever robots on Mars.